So you might be wondering to yourself, why would anybody go and build a mechanical slap machine? And the reason why I've built this machine is not out of some loyalty to a slapping bet code or anything like that. It is more about being curious around Mendix and IoT applications. So, as you know, IT applications are Internet of Things applications, and those applications are kind of manifested in the real world. And so we knew the wonderful enterprise capabilities of Mendix, and we were curious around how we could take some of that functionality into the real world IoT devices. So what we decided to experiment with is this slapping machine, which is really a simple machine actually. It's just a mechanical arm that stores kinetic energy in the form of rubber bands with a solenoid that releases that arm. That solenoid is connected to a Raspberry Pi, and the Raspberry Pi is connected to the Mendix application. And so ultimately, when Jean hits the slap trigger on his mobile app, that tells Raspberry Pi to pull the solenoid pulls, and that results in the real world IoT slap. So it's been quite an interesting learning curve, perhaps quite a painful learning curve, you might say, but it's been interesting and enjoyable, and I think we've learned a few lessons. So the biggest lesson of creating the slapping machine is not to not get in a bad joke competition with Jean, actually. The biggest lesson for me is more around kind of the different skill sets you need to implement something like this. So, you know, as I mentioned before, the way this worked is there had a few components. We had a solenoid, Raspberry Pi, and a Mendix app. So the more we relied on the traditional skill that we've developed as a software engineering business, the easier it was. Creating a Mendix app, creating a mobile app, creating the Python code on the Raspberry Pi, deploying that all to the cloud and having running in several places, that was no problem. It started to get more difficult when we had to connect the solenoid to the Raspberry Pi, because you don't get these native components. It's from my experience at least, it's far more disconnected. And then when it came to actually getting the slapping arm to slap, that was the hardest part of the whole project, quite simply because that is the furthest point away from the skill set that we had. But you know, it's not overachievable, it's just a different learning curve, and it's been a lot of fun to figure that out. I think, you know, the more we play things like heat sensors and sound sensors and light controls and switches that operate things, I think the easier these type of projects are. This is really just more of an experimental project. So I got slapped with the 3-band slap, which was 4-band slap, which is pretty decent, and I wouldn't like to try anything harder than that. But the advantage of the design was ultimately that you could ratchet on like 15 bands if you wanted to, or ratchet it all the way back down to 2, so you could range your strength versus some other design. So that's how it works. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm gonna go get some beer. Cheers.